Hello Stampers, welcome to the craft room. In today's video I'd like to show you how I made this paper cut birthday card. I was inspired when I saw my hobby blade sitting here on the craft table and decided it needed to get some use. So let's get started. We're going to begin with a basic size piece of very vanilla cardstock. This piece is 5.5 by 8.5 inches and I just scored it and folded it in half. And we're going to do a little bit of measuring just so we can create a nice border around our image. So we're going to take a T-square ruler. If you don't have one of these, you can use a different kind of ruler. But what we're going to do is measure in 1/2 inch from the edge of the card. So first I'm just measuring in here 1/2 inch, and I'm just going to mark that very lightly with a pencil. And I'm also going to measure in 1/2 inch from this side of the card and measure that lightly with a pencil. And then I'm going to go ahead and line this up and just draw that 1/2 inch line. Again, very lightly, no need to press hard. We're actually going to be erasing this line later on. And also going ahead and drawing in this other 1/2 inch line here. Line that up. And then what we're going to do is actually measure in from the bottom, or let me turn the card, that might be easier to explain. I'm going to turn the card this way now, and we're going to measure in 1 inch and just mark that. And then I'm going to do the same. I'm going to flip the card this whole way just so you can see. And we're also measuring in 1 inch from this side. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw in those lines. So setting up my T-square again and just going ahead and lightly penciling in that line and this one down here as well. So on the top and the bottom you've got a 1 inch border, and on the sides you've got a 1/2 inch border. Hopefully you can see those lines. The next thing we're going to do is a little bit of stamping. I am taking this stamp from the Pennant Parade stamp set, and we're going to be using some Melon Mambo ink. We're also going to be using our Stamp-A-Majig for a little bit of a lining up. And I've already stamped this onto my clear sheet for my Stamp-A-Majig. So let me just bring in the square for my Stamp-A-Majig, and I'm trying to just center this pretty much in the center. If it's not perfect, it doesn't matter, but just about in the center of that rectangle that we've just marked off. And I'm going to go ahead and line up my Stamp-A-Majig and open up my ink pad and ink up my stamp with this Melon Mambo ink. We're going to move the imaging sheet and we're going to stamp our first pennant. Give that a good press and lift that up. And now we're going to move a little bit to the right. Now you don't want your next pennant touching your first one. You want to leave a little bit of space in between the pennants, and also a little bit of space between the pennant and that 1/2 inch line that you've marked on your card. So that looks about right. And now we're going to do the same on this far right side. So again, leaving space in between the pennant and the edge of my card. Or I should say the edge, that 1/2 inch line that we created a little bit earlier. Okay, so now we have our 3 pennants stamped, and the next thing we're going to do is grab a hobby blade or an X-Acto knife. And when you're doing this kind of paper cutting, you just want to make sure that your blade is sharp. So if your blade is dull, you may want to replace it with a new blade for this project. We're also going to need to open up the card, because if we started doing our cutting with the card closed, it would cut through this next layer too. And I'm going to move this scrap paper away so that I'm cutting on a self-healing cutting mat, because obviously anything underneath my cutting is going to get cut as well. The important thing here, and I'm going to draw this for you just so you can see, is we don't want to just cut out this middle section, obviously, because then we'll lose all of our stamping. So when you're doing paper cutting, you just want to make sure that your images are somehow anchored to the rest of your card. And for our purposes, how we're going to anchor our image is by mimicking a string or ribbon that would be holding our pennants to the actual card. So I'm just drawing those two lines so that we can remember that we do not want to cut this part away, and we also want to have an anchor here on this side as well that's going to do the exact same thing for us. So that's the piece that we definitely do not want to cut out, otherwise we're going to lose all of our stamping. So with our hobby blade, what we're going to do is begin in this upper right hand corner, and I don't use a ruler for this part. You can use a guide if you want, but I have the line, so I'm just going to follow along that line, and I'm just going to press very hard up until that spot that I marked. And now I'm going to come back to that same corner, and I'm going to draw my blade all the way along that line that we drew here, all the way to the other corner. And now, let me turn this so that you can see, I'm going to draw from this corner, draw my blade down to that little guide mark. And you may find that your lines don't exactly meet. You can come back in here and give a little press with your blade so that it does separate from the cardstock. The next thing we're going to do is just come in right along that guideline, so right about there. And then I'm actually going to come a little diagonal up like that. And now I'm going to come across my first pennant to here. Now, just like having to have anchors to the outside of the card, we also need to anchor each pennant to the next so that we don't lose those. So I'm going to anchor them, and again, let me bring in my pencil for you. I'm going to anchor them in between with, again, what's going to look like that ribbon. So just drawing in these little pencil marks by hand, and that looks pretty good. So what we're going to do is just draw our blade right along that little line. And now what we want to do is just match this line with that little line, and I'm just going to do a little diagonal cut to do that. Okay? And we're going to also come up from this part and a little diagonal cut, and then drag straight down till we get here. Then we're going to cut again that little mark we made, and we're making another little diagonal cut right to it. And last one coming up here, a little diagonal cut, and then dragging our blade to cut right across that pennant. And now we've come to our original guide, so we're just going to cut in that little piece, and then we are going to diagonally attach that cut. So we should be able to remove this if, when you go to remove it, and this is how I test it, I just stick my blade right into that cardstock and try to lift. If you get some resistance, don't just pull, because you don't want to tear things. I would just lift up gently, see where you're getting that resistance. I see some right here, and just come in with your blade and very gently try to connect those cuts. So that was the spot where I was getting the resistance, and it looks like I'm getting just a little bit right here as well. So clearing those two, and we can remove that piece of cardstock. So hopefully you can start to see that. The next thing we're going to do is the bottom part. So remember, we don't want to cut away our anchor, so we're going to cut in here, that little piece, and now we're going to make a diagonal cut right along our pennant, and I freehand all of this, which I think is just fine. So you're just coming in and making that diagonal cut. Then we're going to cut across on this line and make another diagonal cut down our pennant. And if these don't exactly meet, that is fine, because we can just cut across like this, and that'll lift up. Okay, And we're going to do this for the other pennants, so starting here, coming down. And now we just have to cut out this big piece of cardstock. So to do that, we're going to follow along this guideline, remembering not to cut through our anchor point. So we're just coming straight down, and then we're going to turn, and we're going to cut all the way across this bottom guideline, like so. And then coming up on this last guideline, remembering to stop when we get to our anchor point, because if you cut all the way through, you're going to detach your pennants. And the same thing here, we're just going to use our blade to try to lift up, and if we see any points of resistance, we're just going to cut through those. Great. I'm just going to cap my hobby blade, and now we have all of our pennants cut out. So the next thing we're going to do is take an eraser to get rid of our pencil lines so that nobody can see those. So I'm just going to gently erase those pencil lines, and I actually like to come in here, since I did draw those extra lines for us, I'm coming in and just erasing all of those. Okay, so we're just going to use our bone folder to recrease that after having it open for so long. So now we're going to do a little bit of stamping. We're going to grab a piece of cardstock. This piece is a 1/2 inch wide, and it's going to be about, let's see how long. Looks like it's about 4.5 inches long is what we're going to need. I have a little extra here, but I'll end up cutting that off. And I'm going to use the Happiest Birthday stamp from the Apothecary Art stamp set. And I'm going to use some rich raspberry ink, and we're just going to ink that up and stamp that greeting down. And I'm moving in just a little bit from the edge because I'm going to want to create a little banner. And I'm going to cut off the end here, leaving some space so that I can create a little banner. I'm going to cut this one in just a little bit so that it looks kind of even with the other side. And so that is 1, 2, 3, 4, it's about 4¼ inches long right now. And then I'm just going to cut in from the center with my paper snips, and then cut in from each corner to that center cut to create my little banner, just like that. And I'm going to do the same on this end as well. And now we're going to use some dimensional adhesive, or your dimensionals. I happen to have these sitting here, so I'm going to use these. And I'm just going to place my dimensional adhesive right here on my card, and I'm just going to position that exactly where I would like it. That looks about right. And adhere that down. So now we have our greeting, and the last thing we're going to do is add a few flowers. So I have this little flower punch from the Itty Bitty Shapes punch pack, and we're going to use a little bit of rich raspberry cardstock, and I'm just going to punch 3 of these. And we're going to use a little bit of Tombow Mono Multi Glue to adhere these. So just a little dab of glue to adhere these to the little pennants. And the last thing we're going to do is just grab some little adhesive rhinestones and add some centers to our little flowers, just for a little bit of bling. What I like about making these cards is that when you actually write in them, you'll be able to see the writing through the window that you've created. And I really like that layered or dimensional effect that you get. And I also really like the shadows that get created when you do paper cutting on a card. So there you have it, a really beautiful and delicate birthday card made using your stamps and your hobby blade to do some really fun window cutting or paper cutting on your card. I hope you've enjoyed this project, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon here in the craft room.